James Garner never forgot what Steve McQueen did. To millions, they were Hollywood's twin legends: Garner, the effortless charmer; McQueen, the cold-eyed rebel who stole every scene. But behind the cameras, Garner carried a truth about McQueen he refused to share for decades. It wasn't admiration, it wasn't friendship, it was something darker. McQueen may have been crowned the king of cool, but Garner saw what the public couldn't: the jealousy, the paranoia, the demons that followed McQueen wherever he went. Their bond cracked under the weight of competition, betrayal, and an obsession with always coming out on top. Garner stayed silent as McQueen's legend grew, watching a man celebrated for greatness while hiding struggles that nearly consumed him. So what did James Garner finally reveal about Steve McQueen that shocked fans? Why did he keep this truth buried for so long? And how does his late-life confession rewrite everything we thought we knew about one of Hollywood's most untouchable icons? James Garner and Steve McQueen came from two very different worlds, yet their paths collided in a Hollywood that thrived on comparisons. Garner was born in Norman, Oklahoma, in 1928. He grew up in the dust of the Depression, joined the Merchant Marines as a teenager, and served in the Korean War before he ever thought about acting. He stumbled into Hollywood almost by accident, landing small roles and modeling jobs before Warner Brothers took a chance on him. His charm wasn't manufactured, it came naturally. Garner never pushed himself forward, and that ease became his greatest strength. When Maverick premiered in 1957, audiences instantly trusted him. He wasn't the loudest or the flashiest, but he was believable. Steve McQueen's beginnings were nothing like that. Born in Indiana in 1930, he grew up abandoned by his father, and caught between a mother who struggled and a stepfather who was violent. He spent much of his youth on the streets, landing in reform schools and bouncing between odd jobs. What could have destroyed him instead hardened him. He discovered motorcycles and racing, and with it, the need to win at any cost. Acting came later, after the Marines and the GI Bill gave him direction, but he carried the scars of those years into every role. Unlike Garner, McQueen's charisma was edged with desperation. He wanted control, attention, dominance. By the late 1950s, both men had found themselves at the center of television's golden age. Garner was the face of Warner Brothers' Western boom, his quick wit and charm in Maverick turning him into one of TV's first true stars. McQueen, meanwhile, broke out in Wanted, Dead or Alive, a grittier, leaner take on the cowboy hero. To audiences, both represented a new kind of masculinity. Garner was easygoing and sly, the kind of man you wanted as a friend. McQueen was intense, brooding, and unpredictable, the man you couldn't look away from. Hollywood quickly noticed the similarities and leaned into the comparisons. Studios liked the narrative: two veterans, both ruggedly handsome, both breaking out on television, both poised to leap into movies. But there was a crucial difference. Garner didn't hunger for stardom. He never saw acting as his identity. It was just work, something he happened to do well. McQueen, on the other hand, needed it. Fame was oxygen. Success wasn't just about the paycheck or the role. It was about proving to himself that he was better than the next man. That difference in philosophy would define their relationship from the start. The competition wasn't invented by gossip columnists. Even in their earliest encounters, McQueen measured himself against Garner. Garner noticed it right away. He once recalled that McQueen would constantly size up what car he drove, what clothes he wore, how people reacted to him at parties. Garner's natural confidence seemed effortless, and that only fueled McQueen's insecurity. The two might laugh together, share stories, even talk about racing, a passion they both shared. But underneath it all, McQueen was always watching, always calculating. Audiences loved to imagine that Hollywood stars of the same era were close friends. For Garner and McQueen, that was never really the case. They moved in overlapping circles, respected each other's work, But even in those early years, Garner sensed that McQueen wasn't someone he could fully trust. Studios wanted them to be rivals on screen, but Garner realized the rivalry was off-screen too. McQueen couldn't let go of comparisons, and Hollywood's tendency to pit men against each other only stoked the fire. By the time the 1960s arrived, the industry had already begun setting up a collision course. Two men, two different approaches, both climbing. Garner, steady and dependable, who could carry a show or a movie without ego. McQueen, restless and ambitious, who would fight for every close-up. Their early careers revealed not just a difference in style but a difference in soul, and that difference would soon explode into the open, in a movie that brought them together, and nearly tore them apart. On the surface, James Garner and Steve McQueen had things in common that could have made them close. They were both war veterans. They both carried a toughness that wasn't learned in acting class but in real life. And both loved cars and racing, a passion that, at least briefly, put them side by side instead of across from each other. Garner's quiet hobby of racing on weekends met McQueen's obsession with motorcycles and sports cars. It might have been the foundation for a friendship. For a moment it almost was. When they crossed paths at events or on studio lots, there was an ease in how Garner treated people. He didn't put on airs, didn't size people up. McQueen seemed to respond to that. He was drawn to Garner's effortless cool, the kind that didn't require a leather jacket or a brooding stare. Garner, in turn, admired McQueen's raw screen power. He understood why audiences were hypnotized by him. For all of McQueen's flaws, his talent was undeniable. But even in those early days, cracks showed. Garner noticed how McQueen's eyes were always moving, as if he were studying everyone in the room, calculating who had the upper hand. What should have been camaraderie was often colored by competitiveness. When the two men talked cars, McQueen wasn't just sharing enthusiasm. He wanted to know if his machine was faster, sleeker, more enviable than Garner's. Garner laughed it off, but he knew it meant more to McQueen than it should have. The truth was, Garner didn't need the competition. He didn't need to measure himself against another man to feel secure. McQueen, however, couldn't help it. He had grown up fighting for every scrap of approval, and Hollywood only sharpened that instinct. Around Garner, who radiated confidence without trying, McQueen's insecurities rose to the surface. What might have been a friendship was quietly poisoned by comparison. There were moments, though, when it seemed like the bond might win out. On studio backlots, they would exchange stories about their military service, laugh at the absurdity of Hollywood executives, even share beers after long days. Garner, with his sharp wit, could make McQueen laugh in a way few others could. McQueen respected that, even if he didn't say it. At times their relationship resembled brotherhood, two men cut from similar cloth, navigating the same unforgiving business. Yet, McQueen's drive to dominate always crept in. Garner later admitted that he often felt McQueen was sizing him up, not as a friend but as a competitor. When one of Garner's films did well, McQueen would take notice, sometimes even mirroring his choices. If Garner took on a certain kind of role, McQueen would later pursue a grittier version, as if to prove he could do it better. Garner wasn't blind to it, and while he never called McQueen out in those days, he filed it away. The contrast between them only deepened as their careers accelerated. Garner was easy with co-stars, generous with screen time, unbothered by Hollywood politics. McQueen, on the other hand, often clashed with directors and negotiated fiercely for control. Garner saw that intensity as both McQueen's gift and his curse. It gave his performances an edge that electrified audiences, but it also left him isolated. Garner once observed that McQueen couldn't separate competition from connection, and it was that flaw that prevented their friendship from ever truly solidifying. Still, there was mutual respect. Garner didn't dislike McQueen, not yet. He saw him as troubled, but he recognized his brilliance. McQueen, for his part, admired Garner's natural charm, even if it gnawed at him that he couldn't replicate it. For a while they maintained an uneasy balance. Friends on the surface, rivals underneath. But Hollywood wasn't about to let two men of their stature coexist peacefully. By the early 1960s, the industry found the perfect stage to pit them against each other, a war film destined to become a classic, and the crucible where their differences would explode for all to see. In 1963, Hollywood put James Garner and Steve McQueen on the same set, and the result was explosive. The Great Escape was a massive World War II epic, based on the true story of Allied prisoners breaking out of a German camp. The cast was stacked with talent: Richard Attenborough, Charles Bronson, Donald Pleasance, but it was Garner and McQueen who drew the spotlight. On paper it was a perfect pairing. Garner as the smooth-talking scrounger, a role that played to his effortless charm, and McQueen as the rebellious cooler king, a natural fit for his brooding, independent image. The audience would see two stars at the peak of their powers. Behind the scenes, though, the dynamic was very different. McQueen was already fiercely competitive, and The Great Escape gave him both an opportunity and a challenge. At first his role was smaller than he wanted, and he panicked at the thought of being overshadowed by Garner. He began pushing back at the script, demanding changes, and threatening to walk off the film if his character wasn't expanded. The tension on set grew obvious. Garner, steady as ever, didn't play those games. He showed up, knew his lines, and delivered without fuss. To the cast and crew, the difference in temperament was glaring. One man made the work easier, the other made it harder. Director John Sturges found himself in the middle. McQueen's talent was undeniable, but his ego was consuming. He wanted more stunts, more screen time, more heroics. Sturges relented, reshaping the film. So McQueen's character got the now iconic motorcycle chase, a sequence that would cement his reputation as Hollywood's rebel daredevil. Garner didn't fight for more attention. He didn't need to. His performance carried its own weight, grounded and believable, and audiences responded to it. Still, Garner couldn't help but notice how desperate McQueen seemed to prove himself. Garner later admitted that the film was the breaking point in their relationship. He respected McQueen's talent, but he saw the insecurity beneath the surface. While others on set were dazzled by McQueen's charisma, Garner saw the restless calculation in everything he did. For McQueen, acting wasn't just about telling a story, it was about winning. Garner wasn't wired that way, and he found it exhausting. In his memoirs, he recalled that McQueen could never be a true friend because he never stopped competing. The rivalry wasn't one-sided. McQueen was acutely aware of Garner's natural likability, and it gnawed at him. Garner didn't have to fight for attention. Audiences loved him without effort. That kind of effortless charm, the thing McQueen could never fully manufacture, was what made him so threatening. McQueen knew he could outstunt anyone, brood harder, push directors to build entire sequences around him. But what he couldn't steal was Garner's ease, that quiet authenticity that radiated without a single line of dialogue. When The Great Escape hit theaters, both men came out as winners in the public's eyes. McQueen's motorcycle chase became legendary, turning him into an international star. Garner's performance reinforced his reputation as a steady leading man who could hold his own among Hollywood's toughest. But beneath the success, the rivalry hardened into something personal. Garner walked away from the film seeing McQueen not as a potential friend but as a man driven by demons that made true connection impossible. McQueen, for his part, carried the jealousy with him, watching Garner's steady career as a reminder of what he couldn't quite be. The irony was that The Great Escape could have been the moment that bonded them forever. Instead, it became the fracture line. Hollywood loved to market them as contemporaries, equals on parallel paths. But Garner knew better. To him, McQueen wasn't an equal. He was a man chasing validation he would never find. And Garner, who valued authenticity above all, couldn't stand close to someone who lived in constant competition. That divide only grew deeper in the years that followed. As McQueen's star soared with hits like Bullet and The Thomas Crown Affair, Garner maintained his steady course, alternating between film and television with consistent success. To the public, they were both icons. To Garner, the rivalry was over. Not because McQueen had beaten him, but because Garner no longer cared to play the game. Yet McQueen never stopped keeping score. By the time the 1970s arrived, James Garner and Steve McQueen had gone their separate ways. Garner settled into a career defined by consistency. He moved seamlessly between film and television, eventually finding a second wave of fame in The Rockford Files. Off-screen, he built a stable life with his wife, Lois, and their family, steering clear of the chaos that seemed to swallow so many of his peers. Garner was never scandal-free, but he carried himself with steadiness, a man who treated acting as a job rather than an obsession. McQueen, by contrast, spiraled deeper into the very demons Garner had always sensed. Fame only sharpened his paranoia. He became known for walking off sets, clashing with directors, and constantly renegotiating contracts to ensure he had the upper hand. He surrounded himself with fast cars, endless toys, and younger women, chasing thrills that never seemed to satisfy. Garner, watching from the outside, recognized the pattern immediately. McQueen wasn't competing with others anymore. He was competing with himself. In interviews and later in his memoir, Garner didn't hide his feelings about McQueen. He called him a strange man, someone impossible to trust completely. He remembered how McQueen would copy his career choices, even down to the kinds of cars he drove, but always twist them into something bigger or flashier. Garner saw it as insecurity disguised as rebellion. "Steve wanted what you had," he once explained. "And if he couldn't have it, he wanted to beat it." That insight summed up their entire relationship. What separated Garner from most others in Hollywood was his refusal to indulge McQueen's ego. Many stars gave McQueen what he wanted, either out of fear or admiration. Garner didn't. He never bent to him, never flattered him, never allowed McQueen's games to dictate how he lived. That independence may have been why McQueen kept Garner at arm's length. He couldn't control him, and he couldn't outshine him in the ways that mattered most. Garner didn't measure his worth in box office numbers or magazine covers. McQueen did, and it left him restless. The distance between them became permanent. Garner rarely spoke about McQueen publicly while he was alive, partly out of respect, partly because he simply didn't care to keep the rivalry alive. But in private, he admitted what most others only suspected: McQueen was haunted. The bravado, the motorcycles, the icy stares on screen, all of it was armor. Underneath, Garner saw a man shaped by abandonment, insecurity, and a constant fear of being left behind. He sympathized with McQueen's childhood scars, but he also knew those scars made him dangerous as a friend. Even decades later, Garner's recollections never softened. He admired McQueen's screen presence but refused to romanticize the man behind it. When fans gushed about the king of cool, Garner would remind them that McQueen's cool came at a cost. It wasn't natural ease like Garner's own. It was a mask, held together by jealousy and mistrust. Garner's truth cut through the myth. McQueen could command the screen, but he struggled to command himself. That honesty was shocking to many, because Hollywood rarely allowed such candor between legends. Fans wanted to believe their heroes shared unshakable bonds, but Garner made it clear there was no secret brotherhood, no lifelong friendship. There was only respect, rivalry, and distance. And it was in that distance that Garner felt the most peace. By refusing to play McQueen's game, he had preserved his own integrity, something McQueen, for all his fame, could never find. When Steve McQueen was diagnosed with mesothelioma in 1979, the news shocked Hollywood. He was only 50, still in demand, still the embodiment of cool to millions. But for James Garner, the diagnosis was less surprising. He had always sensed that McQueen was burning too hot, living too fast, and running from demons that couldn't be outrun. Within a year, McQueen was gone. dead at 50, leaving behind a myth that would only grow larger with time. Garner, watching from a distance, didn't join the chorus of public eulogies. He stayed silent, a silence that spoke volumes. Garner lived on for more than 3 decades after McQueen's passing, long enough to see the legend of the King of Cool canonized in documentaries, retrospectives, and endless reruns of Bullitt and The Great Escape. He also lived long enough to be asked, time and again, about his relationship with McQueen. For years, he kept his answers short, careful not to stain a man's reputation when he was no longer alive to defend himself. But as he aged, Garner began to open up. What he revealed wasn't cruel. It was simply the truth as he saw it. In his memoir, Garner finally admitted what he had always known. McQueen was not the untouchable figure Hollywood celebrated. He was fragile, insecure, and constantly afraid of being left behind. Garner described how McQueen's paranoia had cost him friendships, how his obsession with control made him nearly impossible to work with, and how even success never seemed to satisfy him. To many, these revelations were startling. To Garner, they were simply the reality of a man he had observed up close. What struck fans most was that Garner didn't speak with bitterness. There was no gloating, no lingering resentment. If anything, there was pity. Garner respected McQueen's talent. He always did. He acknowledged that McQueen had a presence that few actors could match, an intensity that electrified the screen. But he also saw the cost of that intensity, the toll it took on McQueen's personal life, and ultimately, on his health. Garner's reflections carried weight precisely because he wasn't trying to win a rivalry anymore. He was telling the truth, without need for embellishment. In many ways, the contrast between the two men's final chapters said more than words ever could. Garner lived to be 86, surrounded by family, remembered not only as an actor, but as a man of integrity. He carried his career with grace, never succumbing to the darker temptations of Hollywood. McQueen, meanwhile, remained frozen in time at 50, his image locked in eternal rebellion, his struggles hidden behind the myth. One endured, the other burned out. Garner's late-life confession gave fans a fuller picture of both men. It didn't diminish McQueen's legacy, but it humanized it. It showed that the King of Cool was in truth a man riddled with doubt, whose brilliance came at the expense of peace. And it reminded audiences that behind every Hollywood legend lies a more complicated story, one that only those closest to them can tell. For Garner, the truth about McQueen wasn't about revenge or settling old scores. It was about perspective. He had outlived his rival, outlived the rivalry itself, and with time he found the freedom to speak plainly. In the end, what he revealed was not the downfall of Steve McQueen, but the tragedy of a man who never found the ease that came so naturally to Garner. In the end, James Garner's revelation about Steve McQueen wasn't meant to destroy a legend. It was meant to reveal the truth he had carried for decades. Garner had no interest in tearing down another man's memory, but he also refused to romanticize what he knew firsthand. McQueen may have been the King of Cool, but behind the icy stare and the iconic stunts was a man fighting battles no audience ever saw. Jealousy, paranoia, and insecurity were his constant shadows, and they shaped every relationship he had, even with Garner. What makes Garner's confession so powerful is the contrast it highlights. One man thrived by keeping life simple, by valuing honesty and family above all else. The other chased approval and control until it consumed him. Garner didn't live longer than McQueen because he was luckier. He lived longer because he carried less weight. He didn't measure himself by the next role, the next paycheck, or the next headline. McQueen did, and it broke him. Their rivalry was never truly about movies or fame. It was about two men, born of different worlds, navigating the same unforgiving business. Garner's late-life honesty pulls back the curtain, reminding us that success and happiness are not the same thing. McQueen achieved the first. Garner in the end found the second. The truth Garner finally revealed doesn't erase McQueen's brilliance. It deepens it. It shows us that the rebel we admired was also a man haunted by scars, a man who could light up the screen but never silence his own doubts. And it leaves us with a question that lingers long after the credits roll. Would Steve McQueen have traded his legend for the peace James Garner carried to the very end? For more emotional stories, check out this video.